All right, picture this for a second. You're tasked with moving an entire Allied army straight across the English Channel, dropping them onto heavily fortified, totally hostile shores, and then you have to supply them continuously for months. So what does the actual planning for something like that look like? Well, before a single boot ever hit the sand on D-Day, there was just an absolute mountain of paper. Seriously, I want you to visualize the sheer volume of typed memorandums, encrypted cables, hand-drawn maps, and logistical charts that literally built the Normandy invasion. It is completely mind-boggling. Welcome to this explainer where we're going to reconstruct the greatest amphibious assault in history, not from the battlefield, but straight from the archives.
Today, we're diving into the incredible archival collections over at the Eisenhower Presidential Library. Now, looking at a finding aid or a list of archival boxes might sound like looking at a dry inventory, but trust me, it's actually a thrilling detective story. Hidden right there within these box numbers and microfilm reels is the entire architecture of Operation Overlord, literally the world's most complex military operation. We're going to use these very records to see exactly how you engineer an invasion from scratch.
Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to navigate this massive archive through 5 thematic chapters. First up, the blueprint of Overlord. Second, the art of deception. Third, engineering an invasion. Fourth, the weather gamble. And finally, documenting the longest day.
Chapter 1, The Blueprint of Overlord.
When you start digging into the archives, you quickly realize an invasion of this incredible scale requires a grand strategy that begins years before the target date. There's this common misconception that the invasion planning just sort of kicked off in 1944. But if we look at the records from the combined chiefs of staff, specifically looking at boxes 1 and 2, they reveal a much longer timeline of global alignment. It actually started way back at the Casablanca Conference in January 1943, and then progressed through Trident in Washington, Quadrant, and finally the Sexton Conference in late 1943. These massive, multi-volume conference proceedings, they were the foundational blueprints, getting the Allied leadership entirely aligned on what would eventually become the cross-channel invasion.
But translating those high-level global conferences into actual action, that required an immense administrative burden. Just look at the specific files preserving this massive effort. You've got the chaff minutes of the Chief of Staff meetings mapping out the daily grind. You've got boxes and boxes of official, eyes-only cables flying back and forth across the Atlantic between General Eisenhower and General George Marshall. But what's really fascinating is you also have the deeply personal human side of leadership, captured perfectly in the intimate diaries of Harry Butcher, Eisenhower's naval aide, which span across boxes 167 and 168. Together with post-war studies like General Board Study No. 1, these documents show the incredible weight of communication required to build this blueprint.
Chapter 2, The Art of Deception.
Now, a blueprint is really only good if the enemy has no idea about it, right? Secrecy was absolutely paramount, and we see this stark, crazy contrast in the archives between what was real and what was totally fabricated. Over in Box 153 of Eisenhower's pre-presidential papers, you'll find the files for Operation Neptune. That was the highly classified actual naval invasion and joint strategy for D-Day. But then jump over to Microfilm Box 4, Reel 30, and you'll find the plans for Operation Fortitude. This was a massive psychological deception and cover plan designed entirely to mislead the enemy, basically hoodwinking Hitler into thinking the attack would come somewhere else entirely. And the crazy part? Both required equal amounts of meticulous, obsessive planning.
And this deception wasn't just some afterthought, it was completely institutionalized. If you dig into the C.D. Jackson papers, specifically Box 10, you find these incredibly detailed psychological warfare plans. Box 15 actually contains the combat zone propaganda itself. Over in Edward P. Lilly's collection, Box 40 is dedicated entirely to the psychological warfare division of SHAEF. They were working in lockstep with deep intelligence, like the ISIS report on France, which meticulously mapped out the Normandy ports and defenses. They knew exactly what the enemy was defending, and they used that precise intelligence to craft their ultimate deception.
Chapter 3, Engineering an Invasion.
Let's move on and see how this all builds. So once the strategy was set and the enemy was successfully deceived, the Allies had to master the physical logistics. Because they knew capturing a major French port immediately is pretty unlikely, they simply decided to bring their own ports with them. Yeah, they called them mulberries. These were massive artificial harbors, designed and constructed in pieces in the UK, and then literally towed across the channel to the Normandy coast. It's wild. Entire microfilm reels, like Box 6, Reel 47, and dedicated motion picture films, such as the 1944 film A Harbor Goes to France, are devoted solely to the staggering fabrication and operation of these artificial ports.
Beyond those mulberries, the granular logistical planning is just staggering. You can pull the actual supply plans for the 5th and 6th Engineer Special Brigades from boxes 553 to 555B just to see how troops were organized for the beaches. Study 128 of the General Board Reports documents the massive logistical troop buildup in the British Isles. And then there's Microfilm Reel 1, which holds the raw, calculating data on every single landing craft, ship, and piece of equipment available. And remember, all of this was supported from the air, which you can see in the U.S. Strategic Air Force's plan for the combined bomber offensive, making absolutely sure the skies were clear before the ships ever set sail.
Chapter 4. The Weather Gamble.
Now, despite all this perfect engineering, the entire invasion hinged on one massive factor no human could possibly control: the weather. The Allies couldn't just guess what the weather would do, they literally had to turn it into a science. Tracing the timeline in the archives, we see that in February 1944, the Admiralty's swell forecast section began testing wave and surf forecasting methods. Meteorologists like Sverre Pettersen, whose memoirs are preserved right there in the library, faced immense, unimaginable pressure. By June 4, 1944, we see these agonizing pre-D-Day weather memorandums, preserved in Harold R. Bull's Box 3, forcing a nail-biting one-day delay. Then, the final memorandums issued on June 5th identified an incredibly narrow, scientifically calculated weather window. The greatest military force ever assembled was literally waiting on a forecast.
Chapter 5. Documenting the Longest Day.
So, the crucial point here is that once the order was finally given, the climax of the invasion began. But history is made by humans, and humans make mistakes, even during the most tightly controlled events in human history. 3. That is the number of days early the Associated Press mistakenly announced the D-Day landings. No joke. Hidden in the papers of John R. Howell, who is the son of an AP staffer, you can actually find the mistaken message announcing the invasion before it even happened, followed by this frantic, panic series of kill messages to retract it. It's such a shocking, deeply human archival anecdote sitting right there amidst a sea of military perfection.
When the launch actually did happen, it was captured not just on paper, but on film. The archives house extensive audiovisual records, like the Crusade in Europe film reels. The summary for Reel 5 captures this sheer drama perfectly. It reads, "After a postponement of one day because of very bad weather, the airborne troops took off, and the invasion fleet shoved off, and the greatest moment in World War II was only hours away." Just letting that description sink in for a second, you realize these archives hold the raw visual proof of the 101st Airborne departing and that mighty invasion fleet cutting through the channel.
Ultimately, what these archival finding aids show us is that the true skeleton of victory isn't found just on the beaches of Normandy. No, it is meticulously preserved in millions of pages of blueprints, tightly guarded secrets, and urgent cables currently resting in archival boxes at the Eisenhower Library. It begs a really fascinating question for you to take away from this explainer today. With all of our digital technology and instant communication today, could modern warfare ever truly replicate this analog masterpiece of coordination, secrecy, and scale? It's definitely something to think about the next time you see a seemingly dry list of historical records, because there is always an incredible story waiting inside the box.